It is lunchtime here in Washington, D.C., and the first full day of Donald Trump's second term in the White House is now well underway. It started, as is tradition, with a national prayer service at Washington National Cathedral. You see there the Trumps alongside the Vances, Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha Vance there in the front row. A moment of reflection, perhaps, ahead of the whirlwind to come. And that whirlwind started on Monday evening with what could be described as a deluge of executive orders. Take a look at Mr. Trump signing those documents in the White House. You'll remember his unique style, too many to mention individually, but among the most eye-catching of those orders, a full pardon for nearly 1,600 of his supporters who were arrested in the riot at the U.S. Capitol in 2021. Orders to start the process of withdrawing the U.S. from the UN's health body, the World Health Organization, and the Paris Climate Agreement. There was also the declaration of a national emergency at the southern border, ordering the military to, quote, seal the borders due to the threat of crime. And President Trump is expected to talk about his infrastructure plans a little later. But before that, we are now going to hear from the newly confirmed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He's making remarks at the State Department. Let's bring up those pictures and take a look at that. And let's listen in as well. Earlier, Mr. Rubio became the first of the cabinet nominees to take his oath of office in a ceremony overseen by the vice president. Here's what he had to say afterwards.
President Trump was elected to keep promises, and he's going to keep those promises. And his primary promise when it comes to foreign policy is that the priority of the United States Department of State will be the United States. It will be furthering the national interest of this country. And he's given us a very clear mandate. President Trump's made it very clear, everything we do, and this is true in government, but especially at the Department of State, everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us more prosperous? If it doesn't do one of those three things, we will not do it.
Okay, that was Marco Rubio when he was sworn in. He is now speaking at the State Department. Let's listen in.
And I'm very proud of my wife, my 4 children, and their support. My wife, Jeanette, who... Her parents immigrated here from Colombia. Anybody here from Colombia? Anybody cover Colombia? Yeah. And then my oldest daughter, Amanda. Say hello, Amanda. And then came Daniela. And now Anthony. And our youngest, Dominic. So these three are in school, meaning, college and even jobs. We're still working. He's doing good. He's a junior in high school, and obviously my family beyond that is here, who made this possible. Jeanette's mom, Maria, is here, and my sisters Barbara and Veronica are here, and a lot of friends that came from Miami who joined us here today, and I'm grateful. And thank you. I also want to recognize my former colleagues from the congressional branch, who also happen to be appropriators and authorizers. And so I thought it was important. 3 people who I've known for a long time. And by coincidence, Florida is very well represented in the authorization and appropriations in the House. Mario Diaz-Balart, who I've known as a personal friend. We served together in the Florida legislature, in fact, sat next to each other on the floor. Who would have thought, Mario, back in the day? And now here we are, and 2 Cuban Americans. If we had a third, they'd call it a conspiracy, but there's only 2, so we're in shape. Congresswoman Lois Frankel, who we also served in the legislature together. Again, I know this... I know it looks suspicious. She just happens to be from Florida as well, and she happened to be on that committee. And then, of course, my colleague, Brian Mast, who thank you for being here as well. I have asked them as a personal favor to be nice to each of you who we send over to testify and appear before their committees. So. And to be nice to us when they write those appropriations bills and pass those laws. But we are great. I'm really grateful you would join us, because our partnership will be critically important. I want to thank President Trump for nominating me. This is an extraordinary honor and a privilege to serve in this role, to be here, frankly, to oversee the greatest, the most effective, the most talented, the most experienced diplomatic corps in the history of the world resides in this building. And it's important to remember that obviously they serve our national interest and our foreign policy. They also serve Americans. And as a member of the Senate, we often would get calls for a brief period of time, panicked calls about passports, as you remember that era, when everyone forgot their passport expired and their cruise was on Saturday and it's Friday, 5 p.m. So we were, why are you guys chuckling? Is that, you know it's true, it happened. And then, of course, but we also serve Americans that sometimes find themselves overseas and lost their passport, or even worse, something terrible or tragic happened and their families are impacted by it. And so it's important, it's an important task, and one that I know is critical to our mission. Beyond that, this is the face of the United States. In fact, if you think about it, for many people on this planet, their only interaction with America, most will never travel here, their only interaction with America in many cases, whether they be leaders or everyday people, will be the men and women who serve us abroad and do so with tremendous integrity and dedication. They are literally the face of our country, whether it's through the aid we've provided or through the services. I also want to say hello, and is this being live streamed somewhere? Are people watching this on all of our missions? Good. I want to thank them. I know they can't be with us here today, and depending on where they are in the world, it's probably not as cold as it's been, at least for a Floridian. So I also think the brilliance of this organization shows by hosting these events indoors, which it's already showing, and we're grateful for that as well. But I want to tell you that I want to thank you, all those who are serving overseas and abroad, some in places that are strong and stable and others that are more tenuous and dangerous. And I want to do something also special. I want to also thank the locally employed staff, the nationals of those countries who work with us. Without their help, without their support, it would be impossible for us to conduct our mission. And in many ways, years later, I've literally run into people in the United States that are either conducting business or visiting as tourists or what have you, and they will tell me they were locally employed they were local employees of our missions abroad, and as a result, their love for our country is never ending. I am new to this department. Today is my first day on the job, literally, but I am not a stranger to it. I've interacted with many of you, both in my travels abroad and in our daily functions. My job now is different, and our job in some ways will be different. In our republic, the voters decide the course of our nation, both domestically and abroad, and they have elected Donald J. Trump as our president when it comes to foreign policy on a very clear mission. And that mission is to ensure that our foreign policy is centered on one thing, and that is the advancement of our national interest, which they have clearly defined through his campaign as anything that makes us stronger or safer or more prosperous. And that will be our mission. That will be our job across the world, is to ensure that we have a foreign policy that advances the national interest of the United States. I expect every nation on earth to advance their national interests. And in those instances, and I hope there will be many, in which our national interest and theirs align, we look forward to working with them. This is in many ways, and again it was referenced by President Trump yesterday in his speech, that he designs, that his overriding goal for global policy is the promotion of peace, the avoidance of conflict. And no agency will be more critical in that regard than this one. In fact, it's its founding principle and purpose. And that's what we endeavor to do, to promote peace around the world, because that's in our national interest. Without peace, it is hard to be a strong nation, a prosperous nation, and one that is better off. But there will also be challenges. We recognize that there will be those times, unfortunately, as humans interact with one another because of our nature. But there will be conflict. We will seek to prevent them and avoid them, but never at the expense of our national security, never at the expense of our national interest, and never at the expense of our core values as a nation and as a people. We are, at the end of the day, a nation founded on a powerful principle. And that powerful principle is that all men are created equal, because our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. And we hope the entire world can one day live under that, and we will always, always be strong defenders of that principle, never at the expense of our national interest, never at the expense of pragmatic foreign policy, never at the expense of the reality that oftentimes in foreign policy, our choices are not between a bad option and a good option. Sometimes in foreign relations, our options are two bad ones, and we're just trying to figure out which one of them is least bad. And that's unfortunate, but it is true. And that's a tough job. It's our job, and we'll seek to do it right and well. That is the core mission of this agency, and it will be the core mission while Donald Trump is president, and we will be effective on his behalf. I also want this agency to be, and I don't mean, not that it's irrelevant now, but I want it to be where it belongs. I want the Department of State to be at the center of how America engages the world. Not just how we execute on it, but on how we formulate it. Some of the brightest minds in foreign policy reside within this building and within this government. And we need to ensure that we have an environment here that's conducive to creativity, to boldness, to new ideas, to recognizing the dynamic world in which we live, one that is changing faster than it has ever changed before. And we need to be ahead of it. When the time comes for the principals to gather, or even deputies, I want the Department of State to have the best ideas and the best options available for the president. And then I want us to be able to execute them better than any agency in our government. That will also be a task of mine. I have watched from the congressional side from time to time administrations in both parties, in which sometimes the Department of State has been sort of relegated to a secondary role because some other agency can move faster or seems to be bolder or more creative. It's not your fault, but we're going to change that. We want to be at the centerpiece. We want to be at the core of how we formulate foreign policy, because we're going to have the best ideas of any agency, and because we're going to execute it better and faster and more effectively than any other agency in our government. And I know we have the right team to do it. There's no other agency in the world, there's no other agency in our government that I'd rather lead, because of the talent that's collected here in this room and those watching around the world. That will be our mission, and I hope we'll be able to do it together. There will be changes, but the changes are not meant to be destructive. They're not meant to be punitive. They're not out of... The changes will be because we need to be a 21st century agency that can move, by a cliche that's used by many, at the speed of relevance. But we need to move faster than we ever have, because the world is changing faster than we ever have. And we have to have a view that some say it's called look around the corner, but we really need to be thinking about where are we going to be in 5, 7, 10, or 15 years. Some of the issues that confront humanity today have no precedent. They have no historic precedent. Some of the challenges we face have no historic precedent. We can compare it to another era, to another time, but they're not the same. Things are moving faster than ever. Think about how much the world has changed in the last 5 years. Imagine how much it will change over the next 25 years. And my sincerest hope and my prayer is that we will, as a nation, be able to leave the future generations with a country and a planet safer and better than the one that was left for us. And you will be a big part of achieving that goal. It is an honor to be able to lead this agency. I hope to do it with distinction and with integrity, working harder than anyone ever has at this role. And that will not be easy, because some pretty hardworking people have come before me. But I know that we are up to the task. And I'm glad that I'm in the job, on day one. I was sworn in at about 9:15. I didn't mess up the oath. And we're ready to go to work, and I know you are as well. Thank you. God bless all of you. God bless our country. Thank you.
Okay, you're watching there Marco Rubio, the newly sworn-in Secretary of State in Donald Trump's administration. He was sworn in earlier this morning, speaking to staff at the State Department. He was speaking also to the staff there and, as he said, to the staff serving the State Department abroad, including, as he said, the local staff, flanked there by his wife and their children. Now, Marco Rubio was voted in by all 99 senators. He was unanimously voted in, so he had the support of all of the Senate. Of course, he was serving as a senator from Florida until he took on this post. He said his agency will be critical in promoting peace around the world. And he also said he wanted this agency to be, quote, where it belongs, at the center of how America engages with the world. So Marco Rubio, as you see there at the State Department, taking up his new role in this Donald Trump administration. Our correspondent, Ione Wells, has been following this for us today. Ione, what do you think this message is that Marco Rubio is sending to the rest of the world, of course, allies and adversaries on day one as Secretary of State?
That's right. Well, I think one significant thing about his appointment in general, he is the first Latino American to serve as the US's top diplomat, and he's made it pretty clear that he plans to take quite a hardline stance against the countries that he sees as the US's adversaries, namely to the south, Cuba, Venezuela in particular. He's from a Cuban family. He, I think, is pretty set to reverse a policy that Joe Biden only recently did, which was to remove Cuba from a list of countries accused of sponsoring terrorist groups. That's something which I think certainly Marco Rubio plans to reverse. Secondly, I think it's likely that he will take a tougher stance on Nicolas Maduro's government in Venezuela as well, potentially removing some of the sort of remaining licenses that exist for oil sales and essentially strengthening the sanctions regime against Venezuela. I think that's something that's likely to happen. One of the kind of interesting things as well to bear in mind about him will be sort of what his response is more widely, given some of Trump's statements in recent days around, for example, wanting to take Greenland, wanting to take ownership of the Panama Canal, both of which have been strongly rejected by both Denmark in the case of Greenland, but also by Panama's government when it comes to the canal. So how he will be sort of responsible when it comes to negotiating what Trump has indicated that he wants to do in those cases. I think there's also then this question more generally, which will be how does he, or what moves does he do to try and implement what Trump has described as a desire to end current conflicts, both in Ukraine but also in the Middle East as well. Trump still hasn't given very much detail on what exactly he plans to do when he's made those very bold claims, both during the campaign but also since becoming president. So I think that will be something which Marco Rubio will have to sort of, well, be intending to spell out more detail on.
All right, indeed, Ione, as we're looking at these pictures still of Marco Rubio at the State Department, this is, of course, the first full day for Donald Trump in his second term. Give us an idea of what the day has looked like for him.
Well, he's been sort of meeting with top Republicans today. Of course, he's announced a flurry of different executive orders in the last 24 hours since his swearing in as president. Notably, as well, he has pardoned more than 1,500 people involved with storming the Capitol building, who had been some of whom have now been released from prison since, but he's also been sort of essentially cancelling any sort of existing legal action for some of those still facing consequences of those riots that took place. He's also removed the US from some key treaties, including saying that he's going to remove the US from the WHO, who he heavily criticized during the COVID pandemic, but also saying, ordering officials to remove the US from the Paris Climate Treaty as well. Again, it's something which he had done previously as president, but something which he has shown his intention to do again. Of course, immigration was a big feature of his campaign, as we know, and that is something which he has also been a big focus of his executive orders, in particular when it comes to his desire to shut down the Mexico border.